17.2% in June to 11% in July. Nigeria records a decline in positive COVID-19 cases.
It is too early to draw conclusions, but it is noteworthy that the testing increased by over 40,000 in that 1 month. What we see is just suggestive of the fact that at least our strategy is not failing.
Unity colleges reopened nationwide today for exit classes.
Progressive Governors Forum reaffirms position to support Borno State in its quest to end lingering security challenges.
On Good Morning Nigeria today, we shall focus on borrowing terms and Nigeria's sovereignty.
The million-dollar question is, this borrowing is for what? What will be the payment mode? This is the chance to see and get to hear when issues of the country and an intent to seek external loans looms, not with past debts bringing concerns all over the place then and more so today.
That's right, Jumai. Now, it is, of course, worthy of note that borrowing has always been a window of financial opportunity for many nations, developing and, of course, developed. And that's, of course, intended to help them run their economies. And Nigeria, for reasons usually adduced, also chooses to access both bilateral and multilateral loans with terms and conditions usually stipulated, plus the fact that there are terms for the repayment of such loans.
Exactly, Kingsley. Borrowing or getting loans to addressing critical deficit is not ugly in itself. The absurdity will be in not considering this borrowing strategy and terms of agreement to the latter.
Well, Nigeria's debt profile has been mounting in recent times, and the matter, of course, is there for all to see. Now, but there is a concern about the clauses relating to the recent loans, both bilateral and multilateral, that the country has entered into.
And key for this conversation today is the outlook from last week's House of Representatives sitting over the rising trend of government officials signing loan agreements, particularly with a clause that waives the sovereign immunity of the country as if it defaults in its payment plan.
Well, the House of Representatives already has sought for explanation over what is referred to as the holes in the $400 million loan agreement between Nigeria and China, and that is for the National Information Technology Infrastructure Backbone Phase 2 project. Now, it was signed in 2018, and there are concerns as to the controversial clause said to be in the agreement. And one question is just how many other such agreements are there that we do not yet know about publicly.
So the question will be what goes into these bilateral and multilateral agreements when it concerns the organs of government. And are those clauses in these agreements not standard procedures to be keenly studied before pen is put to paper?
Well, another question could be what exactly are there in the terms and conditions in the amounts borrowed that would result in the ceding of the country's sovereignty as a condition, assuming indeed that is a clause, and what measures are being taken to look out for the interests of the country and her peoples, and what other compromises might be there that the country needs to be wary of. Those are issues we intend to look at this morning as we examine borrowing terms and the alleged infringement or compromise of Nigeria's sovereignty. My name is Kingsley Osadolo, and I welcome you to this edition of Good Morning Nigeria, reaching you as always on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority.
And I am Jumo Yusuf. Thank you so much for joining us. We shall also bring you our complimentary segments of the program. But first, let's join Ifoma Ojinta for the morning news. Good morning, Ifoma.
Good morning, Jumo. Good morning, Kingsley. And here is the morning news. Nigeria recorded a decline in positive COVID-19 cases from 17.2% in June to 11% in July, despite an increase in testing capacity during the period. The Presidential Task Force on COVID-19 at Monday's briefing in Abuja says citizens, however, cannot afford to lower their guards to prevent community transmission.
It's too early to draw conclusions, but it is noteworthy that the testing increased by over 40,000 in that 1 month from June to July, while the number of positive cases dropped by more than 2,000. We must not rest on our oars, and what we see is just suggestive of the fact that at least our strategy is not failing.
In the meantime, Nigeria records her lowest number of confirmed coronavirus infections in 2 months, as the Nigeria Center for Disease Control announced 288 new confirmed cases for the 3rd of August 2020. So far, 44,129 cases have been confirmed, 20,663 cases have been discharged, and 896 deaths have been recorded in 36 states and the Federal Capital Territory. The 288 new cases are reported from 15 states, with Lagos recording 88, Kwara 33, Osun 27, FCT and Enugu 25 cases each, Abia 20, Kaduna 17, Plateau and Rivers 13 cases each, Delta 10, Gombe 8 cases, Ogun 4, Oyo 3, while Katsina and Bauchi recorded 1 new case each. On the state's case chart, Lagos maintains the highest with 15,355 cases, followed by FCT with 3,997 cases, while Oyo is third with 2,771 cases. The Minister of State for Education, Chukwuemeka Nwajuba, has announced that all the 104 Unity colleges are ready to open their gates to exit classes on the 4th of August 2020, announcing the preparedness of the Unity colleges at a meeting with commissioners for education of the 36 states of the Federation via the Zoom platform. The minister lauded principals of Unity colleges for comprehensive preparation put in place for resumption. The commissioners had reported varying stages of preparation and readiness for reopening between the 4th and 10th of August 2020 for virtually all schools within their jurisdictions. A statement from the Office of the Ministry's Director says the Minister of State for Education, Permanent Secretary and Directors will embark on an assessment tour of all Unity colleges to ascertain and confirm the reports submitted by principals of Unity colleges. Similarly, Federal Education Quality Assurance Directors deployed to the states have been directed to monitor compliance in their respective states, as commissioners from states were also enjoined to embark on assessment tours in their jurisdiction to ascertain the level of compliance with stipulated guidelines. While most schools will reopen tomorrow, others will continue to fine-tune their preparations in the coming days for reopening. All returning students are to undergo temperature checks among other protocols before being admitted into their schools. Meanwhile, the Minister of Education, Meanwhile, the Minister of State for Education, Chukwuemeka Nwajuba, says he's monitoring developments across the country on schools reopening, which has already commenced in some states. The minister was speaking in an interview at the Presidential Task Force daily briefing in Abuja on the outcome from a meeting with commissioners for education of the 36 states of the Federation via the Zoom platform.
We also gave them a template, a checklist of all the things we asked, principal of which is how the social distances will take place. Whether the schools are in a good sanitary condition, depending on the location and what facilities that are in the place. And if they are not, what we must do in order to make sure that they are in place. Then to check out if, for instance, they created the base we wanted in case any child, how we can react.
The minister also addressed the issue on testing of students for COVID-19 before resumption. Provide
any specificity as to anybody should be tested, whether teachers or students or parents or not. But we believe that some people have acted out of the preponderance of caution. But we know that tests are only effective for the time when they are made, and children are going to be there for a couple of days. So we didn't prescribe it as a precondition.
He urged schools to strictly comply with the COVID-19 safety protocols as nationwide monitoring and evaluation is still ongoing. The Federal High Court sitting in Lagos has granted the final forfeiture of more than 800 million naira allegedly belonging to Flank Power Resources and GMFD Ventures to the federal government. Justice Chukwujeku Aneke of the Federal High Court granted the order following an application by the EFCC investigator seeking the forfeiture of the said sum to the federal government on the grounds that the funds were proceeds of an unlawful activities by the two companies which are contractors to the Niger Delta Development Commission. EFCC had discovered that between 2018 and 2019, the two companies had received the funds from the NDDC at an inflated cost and without executing the contract. The reported plan by the Trade Union Congress to embark on a nationwide protest over alleged inaction by President Buhari on high-level corruption at the Niger Delta Development Commission, the Nigeria Social Insurance Trust Fund, and the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission is ill-advised and totally uncalled for, considering that there are ongoing investigations in the cases by both the executive and legislative arms of government. Coming from the presidency in a statement by the Presidential Assistant on Media and Publicity, Garba Shehu, the statement adds that it is against the norm in a democratic society as well as the natural laws of justice to seek action, meaning punishment against offenders before proper investigation, trial and conviction. The president had made it clear that the allegations that have surfaced clearly constitute a breach of trust and the investigations take hold and close. All those found wanting will face the wrath of the law. The TUC, the statement further adds, is an enlightened group of labor unionists who should indeed voice their indignation whenever such acts are being unearthed, and the administration is committed to fighting corruption, and organizations like the TUC should be extending a hand in supporting such a fight that is in the collective interest of the nation. The Progressive Governors Forum has reaffirmed its position not to relent in supporting Borno State in its quest to bring to an end the lingering security challenge. Chairman of the Forum and Governor of Kebbi State, Atiku Abubakar Bagudu, stated this while on a sympathy visit to Professor Babagana Umara Zulum over the attack on his convoy in Baga Town, Kukawa local government area of Borno State.
The Nigerian security agencies have been doing the very best they could, but what we are saying and what everyone has been saying, please do more.
That the insurgency is not ending. There is a sabotage in the system, and therefore there is need for the president to examine the current security situation in the region with a view to resolving it in a sustainable manner.
And that's the morning news. The program continues with Kinsley and Jumai after this break.
You're watching Good Morning Nigeria on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority. It's time for a newspaper review.
And our newspaper reviewer, Bayo Toby, is in the studio. Good morning, Bayo.
Thank you, Juma. Good morning. Good morning, Kinsley.
Right,
good morning, Nigeria.
Right.
Yes, we have like two papers this morning. Let's begin with the Daily Trust newspaper. Just below the masthead, we have, we're still worried over school reopening. That's coming from the federal government. You find that story on page 3. Ogun State Governor cancels COVID-19 test levy, apologizes to parents, and you find that story on page 10. Why Atiku Saraki Kwankwaso won't return to APC. Details on page 32. And the headlines there, we are vulnerable to attacks. That's coming from governors with a rider to meet Buhari service chiefs. Say insecurity getting out of hand. Governor's action belated. That's coming from the security experts. Job loses loom as ShopRite moves to leave Nigeria. Job losses loom as ShopRite moves to leave Nigeria. With riders, potential buyers named. It's the divestment that's coming from a source, and that story is on page 20. Down the picture story there, medics hand discharge sheets along with a laboratory test slip indicating a negative result to patients being discharged after they have recovered from COVID-19. Infection at the Kenyatta Stadium turned into a mass isolation facility in Kenya's eastern town of Machakos yesterday. And at the bottom plate of the Daily Trust newspaper, the curious case of Bielsa's 2.3 billion naira bridge that never was. You find details on page 12. Disquiet as Air Peace sacks pilots. That story is on page 42. Over 3 billion tons of choline abandoned in states. You find that story on page 8. Kinsley?
Right. We also have the Daily Sun newspaper with us, and an earpiece beside the name flag says NDDC contracts, which is the kicker. Akpabio's new list sparks controversy with the rider Kalu, Ibori, and Uduanga reply Niger Delta Minister. Details can be found on page 20. Below the nameplate says money laundering. That's another kicker. EFCC files additional charges against ex-AGF. That's Attorney General of the Federation, Adoke. Details can be found on page 5. Schools in shaky resumption. That's the list story, and he has 3 riders. Partial reopening in Lagos and other states. Anambra and Kaduna gear up to reopen August 5th and 10th. Education Minister and PAMSEC tour schools. And you can see some of the photographs on the front page there with the captions. Teachers of Government Secondary School, Garki, Abuja, after their meeting in preparation for the resumption of exiting classes yesterday. Hand-washing items at Government Secondary School, Wuse Zone 3, Abuja, in readiness for school resumption. So you make a ceremony of these buckets and hand-washing items to say you want to resume. These are items that ordinarily should be readily provided without a ceremony of lining them up for people to come and see that they are available. All right, below the photographs, it said Senate probes bank over illegal withdrawal of 41 billion naira from NITEL and MTEL accounts. That's on page 2. Governors angry over Boko Haram attacks in Borno, say insecurity worsening. Now to meet President Buhari. Details on page 6. Account for failed $460 million Abuja CCTV project and $2 billion China loan. APC tells PDP, that's page 3, with a rider, you are trivializing mortgaging of Nigeria's sovereignty, PDP replies. And a strip headline right there at the foot of the front page, and this, of course, contradicts what Jume read a while ago from Daily Trust. It says, ShopRite denies pull-out rumor, says it won't abandon $30 billion investments in Nigeria. Details on page 2. Bayo.
In fact, the correction of that report said that rather than divest, they are recapitalizing because they are taking full advantage of the ease of doing business in Nigeria.
So where did the story come from? Just
Come on,
like
ignore these speculations in the social media. If you are not careful, you'll be taken for a ride on the social media.
Exactly.
No, I think it's less, I mean, we can always lampoon the social media for misrepresenting issues at times. But this, of course, just came from, I believe, the miscommunication of the South African owners of ShopRite. Because the initial report concerned the information that they put out in the reports that are usually mandated by the stock exchange, that is the governing authority or supervisory authority in South Africa. And they said that they were going to divest their Nigerian operations on account of the losses that they had been suffering. That report was out there in the traditional media, not just in the social media. It was later that the Nigerian investors and other interest groups, they say, no, the fact that they have said that in South Africa doesn't mean that ShopRite is closing shop here. And the names of potential acquirers of the interest that might be divested, they started, appearing also in the report. So it wasn't a question of the social media misrepresenting the issue. It had to do with the way ShopRite South Africa, that's the parent company, managed the information in the first instance. And knowing that ShopRite has a number of outlets here in Nigeria, I think that ought to have been properly managed.
It was specified.
I think if they have understood that there is ShopRite South Africa, ShopRite Nigeria, the ShopRite Nigeria is a Nigerian registered company. And so what happens in the parent company will not apply here. The same thing applies with MultiChoice South Africa and MultiChoice Nigeria. Anyway, but let's go to the issue of the reopening of schools. Lagos State opened yesterday, and Tribune reports that in the area of Ifako and Agege, there were poor attendance. Most private schools, it has not opened yet. Again, it is not far-fetched because there was conflicting in dates. Lagos said they will resume August 3rd. Federal government said their schools should resume August 4th. And also with the intervening Salah holidays, there was a lot of doubts. But when with the resumption, the Ministry of Environment said that they have taken upon themselves to disinfect all the 104 federal unity schools. This is to ensure that the environment is ready for students who are expected to resume today. The Minister of State for Education, Chukwuemeka Nwajuba, is also emphasized that preparators are to charge fees for the third term, and also they should also be ready to enhance teachers for the revision of preparation for exams, which will start from August and span across till November next year. Meanwhile, the Ogun State government has cancelled the idea of paying for test. The governor has in fact apologized for it. He says the misinformation, the mix-up came from the fact that they had actually recognized private test laboratories, that parents who wanted to go there will now have it reduced from 50,000 and above to about 25,000. But on the second talk from the protest from the parents, the governor has apologized and said everybody should be tested for free. But the governor has expressed serious misgivings. He says that if data from across the world where schools have reopened are anything go by, there's always a spike in local transmission. Therefore, he's very worried. And therefore, he has emphasized that all the protocols to be observed, temperature testing, water for washing hands, and social distancing should be emphasized. The Ministry of Education too has emphasized that on no account should there be more than 20 pupils in any classroom. All these initiatives are taken to ensure that the schools open freely. But again,
I think that is, I'm sorry to interject, I think it's important to clarify this, because this has always been the conflation about this issue. All pupils are not reopening.
Yes.
All pupils are not resuming, rather. They're not resuming. So let's not, assuming you have how many arms in a particular class, say from SS3 or SS2, if JS1 and JS2 are not in school, SS1 and SS2 are not in school, it means therefore that you have many more classrooms where you can spread the SS3 students and JSS3 students,
Yes.
SS3 they call them, yes,
just
students.
S3.
It is not all these pupils or students that are resuming at the same time. So I think that we should avoid this conflation that it keeps creeping in that schools have reopened, so we have to be wary. Yes, they should take precautions. Let them, the fewer the pupils are, the easier it is to supervise, to manage them, and then get the right social distancing, and be sure that if a pupil is not wearing a face mask, you can direct that particular pupil. They say exit pupils, resume. When you finish your exams, then the consideration can then be given for the other classes. I think that's part of the reason why this has lingered for so long. Otherwise, by now, WAEC should have been in focus with their examinations.
There's hardly any school that will have up to 1,000 exit students. No. If they have about two streams. So it can be managed. They have the whole compound, the whole classroom in every school to manage for the students, and the whole of the dormitory for the whole school to manage for the exit students alone. So it's something that can be contained. But on the COVID update so far, yesterday we had 288 new cases in 15 states. The good news is that Lagos, which had the highest, had 88, and it was followed closely by Kwara. For days now, we have not reached the century mark. You know, in cricket, when you score more than 100, it's called the century.
Yes.
No states for a long time now are reaching that century mark, which shows that there's a progression in the fact that we are beginning to bend the curve. But so far, we had a total of 44,129. And yesterday, 8 deaths has now brought our total to 896. Governors Dave Umahi and Governor Kayode Fayemi have all returned to work. You recall that some weeks ago they tested positive. They have now tested positive and
they have not tested negative.
Tested negative, sorry, and have now returned to work. Meanwhile, for the school feeding program, the Minister for Humanitarian Affairs, Disaster Management and Social Development has clarified that a sum of 523.3 million was spent all over, and she gave a detailed account of it. You recall that when they said they were going to use the school feeding program, we were wondering, how are you going to do that when students are on holiday? Yes. And she explained that they worked through that in consonance with the Governors Forum. And the 3 states that were involved were FCT, Lagos, and Ogun State. You recall that those were the 3 locations where the federal government directed the lockdown. So what they did was, in fact, to use the criteria provided by the Nigeria Bureau of Statistics and the Central Bank, that by their data, there are about 5.6 members in every household, and there are 3 to 4 children. Using that as a guide, they were able to provide for every family that had a maximum of 3 to 4 children. They provided for a sum of 1,400 per child, and for 3 children, that is 4,200. So FCT had 29,609, Lagos 37,589, and Ogun 60,319. Okay, and that is what got us to that. We're
running out of time. Let's now go to the editorial, and it's coming from The Nation newspaper, and it's talking about additional's vindication, victory for due process. Let me just read a little. We commend the panel for a job well done. We also commend both the Ethics Committee and the Board of Governors for standing firm in defense of the rules. With African Union endorsement in the kitty and no other candidate in contention, our expectation is that the non-regionals will finally let things be.
Yeah, ordinarily, the board of the ADF, which ought to have been the final authority, they do not have any qualms about the integrity of the president of the ADF. It was the Undersecretary of U.S. at the insistence of the United States government, the external body, that insisted. But the panel headed by the former president of Ireland did a good job, and they worked with the ethics of the board, and Dr. Akiwumi additional has been vindicated. What the editorial is saying that the coast is now clear since there are no other candidates for Akiwumi additional.
Victory for due process, they say.
So victory for due process, yes.
That's right. Thank you very much, Bayo Tobi. We would like to appreciate your being around. We'll see you again tomorrow.
Thank you.
All right, it's Good Morning Nigeria on NTA's network service. We'll take a short break now. When we return, we'll be dealing with borrowing terms and Nigeria's sovereignty.
You're welcome back, and to begin our discussion on the subject matter, let's join Abdul Malik Adi with this background report.
As at the last evaluation from the Debt Management Office, as of the first quarter of 2020, Nigeria's debt stock stood at $79.5 billion, an equivalent of 28.6 trillion naira, pushing the debt servicing with 15% increase from the figure that was recorded for the corresponding period in 2019. Expert explains that this rising debt has put a lot of pressure on government's resources as it spends $1.69 billion US, an equivalent of 609.13 billion naira, to service its domestic debt in the first quarter of 2020 alone. This has elicited reactions and a growing concern in public discourse, especially the capacity of government to effectively service this debt and at the same time meet the bursting needs and aspiration of the citizenry going forward. While some say the country's economic growth is undermined by this huge debt and corruption, others say borrowing serves as a veritable financial platforms for many countries in the world in running their economies, and Nigeria should not be an exemption. Though the budget projection for 2020 anticipates a debt service sum of 2.45 trillion naira, an amount higher than the 2.14 trillion naira marked for capital expenditure, and with China as a major benefactor, experts say the federal government needs to do more to reduce the country's debt profile so as not to lose Nigerian sovereign debt sustainability. Guest on Good Morning Nigeria will take a critical look at the terms of agreement in accessing foreign loans and its impact on the Nigerian economy.
All right, many thanks, Abdul Malik Adio, for that backgrounder. With us here in the studios to discuss this issue, I would like to welcome the Honorable Minister of Justice and Attorney General of the Federation, Learned Senior Advocate Abubakar Malami. Honorable Minister, a pleasure to have you on Good Morning Nigeria.
My pleasure being on board.
Okay.
Thank you.
Also here with us in the studios, we would like to welcome the Minister of Transportation, Right Honorable Rotimi Amechi. Honorable Minister, delight to have you with us on the
program. My pleasure. Good morning.
Okay.
And also, continue.
Yeah, hi, third one. That's Professor Uche Waleke. He's Chairman, Institute of Bankers of Nigeria and former Commissioner for Finance in Imo State. He's a professor of capital markets. He's right here with us in the studios. He's actually Chairman of the Abuja branch. A pleasure to have you with us, Professor Uche Waleke.
Thank you very much. Good morning, Nigerians.
All right, so let's begin the conversation with, shall we say, the man in the eye of the storm. We saw what has been happening in the media following the House of Representatives Committee hearing on the loans that Nigeria has taken and the issues that the members say that they have with the terms and conditions of those loans. So let's have some clarifying statement from the Honorable Minister of Transportation. Exactly what are the issues? I mean, the House Committee on treaties, protocols, and agreements met, and but what emerged from that was to say that Nigeria's sovereignty, apparently, according to them, is under threat. So exactly what are the issues?
Well, just like the interview I had with IT, and the woman asked, the lady asked, why were you invited? I honestly don't know why I was invited. The reason is, first, I don't deal with loans. I implement loan agreements. When the funds are gotten by Ministry of Finance, I implement loan agreement. So when they invited me, I asked, why am I here? If it is about loan, the loan was signed by Ministry of Finance, and Ministry of Finance is here. The only thing you can talk about is to investigate the contract. That's a different thing. But however, like I tell people, I say, I'm a member of this government, so I would stand and by whatever decision the government has taken collectively in the cabinet. Now, the loan they're even investigating was not signed by this government. It was not. It was signed by the government of President Goodluck Jonathan, if it is in Lagos, the Kaduna, Abuja. So when I listened to AITC, where one unknown Jew from PDP was abusing us and asking us that we took loan, it was the PDP government that took the loan when Goodluck was in power, and that was $500 million for Abuja, Kaduna. The loan we took is Lagos Ibadan. So if you are saying that, if PDP is saying that we signed out the sovereignty of the country, then PDP signed it out in 2011, 2010. That was when that loan was, 2011 loan. Now, the Ministry of Transport made that loan, when we say 80% constructed, PDP was very happy to say, good luck, constructed the rail up to 80%. And then the remaining 20%, the president didn't borrow money. He gave me money from the budget to complete the rail and put the coaches on the track. So when we were invited, we asked them, what are we invited for? Because if there's anybody to account for the loan, it's Ministry of Finance. Now, if you say you're investigating, then call the Minister of Finance under President Goodluck Jonathan, who happens to be Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala. They signed that loan, not us. So, but if what is of focus is the Lagos-Ibadan, then we can say that. However, again, what the National Assembly did, and I try as much as possible as a former speaker not to question the fact that we should show a lot of knowledge about what happens. If the chairman of the committee, who is supposed to know treaty, he should know that these are standard clauses. So you don't even blame President Goodluck Jonathan. There are standard clauses that are found in the loan agreement. Now, our Attorney General, if we're talking about the loan of Lagos-Ibadan, is not a fool to have read this in that will mortgage the sovereignty of the country and ask us to go and sign. There are processes. When those agreements come, Minister of Finance says it goes to Minister of Justice, who will confirm whether it is right or wrong before we can sign. So it is just people trying to throw out propaganda right there.
Can you, in a way, break down that clause that says we've given our sovereignty to China so that Nigerians can begin to understand what it all means? There's so much talk about it, but a lot of Nigerians don't know what is entailed in the clause.
There's a lot of ignorance going on. There's also a lot of politics and deliberate attempt at trying to paint the government this thing. That's why I say, okay, if that's what they want to paint, then let us now start to say the truth from where it began from. We will not blame President Goodluck Jonathan's government. No. Because, like I said, that is a standard clause. Luckily, the Attorney General is on this panel. It's a standard clause in every loan agreement. What does it mean? It doesn't mean that tomorrow China will come here and become president. Maybe I will be the vice. So you have a Chinese and then you have a black man as vice. No, that's not what it means. What it simply means is that, the Attorney General will explain, he's a lawyer, I'm not. He will say to you when he explains that, no, you can't take a country to court in another sovereign unless he waives his sovereignty. Now, if therefore I give you $500 million and you're not able to pay, I should be able to go to arbitration. So that clause enables them to go to arbitration and say, look, these guys are not paying me. So can you create an avenue for me to collect back my money? If therefore there's an asset that you have mortgaged, that asset, they must also have the right to get to that asset. If you don't waive that immunity, they cannot. These are standard clauses that you find in loans. Then somebody just gets up that day, and this one I said, look, I see how it happened. That's why we didn't address it there, because it wasn't an important issue. What happened was I said, you can't talk to me about loan. I don't know anything about loan. Talk to Minister of Finance. And then I said, I don't know why you're even investigating these loans, because they were approved by the National Assembly. So if they said, we signed out the sovereignty of the country. So when they were approving it, didn't they see it?
Yes, what took them too long to find
exactly?
The agreement?
That's the question to ask. So why didn't they see that we were signing out the sovereignty of the country and question it? Anyway, I told them, so I'm not part of loan business, so I'm leaving. They said, but you shouldn't say we shouldn't investigate. If not, how would we have seen that we had signed out the sovereignty of the country? And then I left. So nobody has signed out any sovereignty. The sovereign nation is a sovereign nation. Nobody can recolonize us. We're a sovereign nation that will continue to elect our president. But we must learn to pay our debts, and we are paying. In that interview, the debt management board or agency office DMO confirmed that we have paid back about $92 or $98 million out of the $500 million, which means we are paying. And once you are paying, nobody will come and take any of your assets, right? The man who came on behalf of PDP that day said, "Oh, they are targeting LNG." Is it part of the guarantee that we gave? I don't think so.
Okay, Honorable Minister, thank you very much. Now, let's bring in the Attorney General of the Federation, the learned senior advocate. Is this a storm in a teacup?
Sorry?
Is this a storm in a teacup?
Well,
to say that, we have signed, maybe probably we're the one that signed it, or maybe Honorable Minister Amechi was the one that signed off the sovereignty of the country. According to the House of Reps.
I can not in all sincerity see any storm, much less of having it in a teacup, as far as the immunity issues being put across the public space are concerned. But I think for the purpose of clarity, it is important, one, to understand the concept of immunity in its own right. And within the concept of immunity, there are some divisions associated with immunity: territorial immunity, for example, jurisdictional immunity, commercial immunity, among others. If you talk of immunity within the context of diplomatic immunity, which indeed is a state immunity arising from international conventions of diplomatic immunity, which has the implication of the independence of a state and its institution in its own right, there is no concession whatsoever made by Nigeria as it relates to the diplomatic immunity that has to do with its independent existence as a nation. Neither was any concession made as it relates to institutional diplomatic immunity of the Nigerian institutions. But then when you talk of immunity within the context of commercial sense, I think that is where the need to clarify issues with particular reference to the loans and commercial transactions among nations are concerned. Concession relating to immunity for the purpose of provision of commercial guarantee are normal, traditional, and usual. Nations enter into respective interstate agreement, for example, and in the course of so doing, surrendering their jurisdictional immunity. It is on account of that, for example, that you see Nigeria signing an agreement with other institutions or nations and agreeing to a choice of territorial jurisdiction for the purpose of determining disputes when they arise. So that is how eventually you see Nigeria submitting to jurisdiction for a determination of a trade disputes in UK, in Paris, and in other international fora or jurisdiction, even when Nigeria as a nation has diplomatic immunity. And now that brings you to commercial immunity. Now, the context and the implication of a commercial immunity or sovereignty is indeed embedded in an appreciation that country A requests for a loan facility from country B. And then country B is entitled as a matter of right to extract a guarantee, to extract a commitment, to extract an understanding that at the end of the day, the loan advanced will eventually be paid when the need for so doing arises. So it is indeed a concession on sovereignty, giving an undertaking, providing a guarantee for repayment of the facility when the need arises. So commercial immunity is in essence a mere guarantee that allows an advancing state an opportunity, right, and power to claim back the financial advances made to a party state. And that in its own right is indeed exclusive to an asset for the purpose of repayment of the loan. It is in no way extended to perhaps concession to diplomatic immunity, by which you now surrender the rights, privileges, and independence of a nation state, but indeed a commercial term that is restrictive, exclusive to an asset, commercial asset for that matter, in the event of default. That is indeed relevant and material because the underlying point as far as immunity is concerned is that no state can attach an asset of the other. And if a state is now making a request for a commercial facility, it is only logical that the other advancing state make a request for protection, make a request for guarantee of repayment. So the bottom line is to appreciate the difference between international diplomatic immunity, which in its essence and right is an immunity relating to the independent existence of a state, and a commercial immunity, which in essence is a commitment that you are now conceding that in the event of default of payment of advance amount of money, you have the right to now attach the asset, commercial asset of a borrowing state for the purpose of satisfaction. So that is where I think the misconception set in, misconception to the effect that the National Assembly is in essence looking at the international diplomatic immunity as against commercial immunity, which in its own right operates only to guarantee the repayment of an advanced loan.
Well, sorry, Juma. Now, for the benefit of our viewers, I would have asked the Attorney General to recast what he has just said, but I'm sure that he will state it in as much legalese as he has already said it. Of course, he's the Chief Law Officer of the Federation. There are three issues here. You have the opportunity of breaking them down. You can actually do a doctoral thesis on the three issues that he has outlined. That is international diplomatic immunity, which relates to the independence of the country. He says that's not the issue here. He also talks about jurisdictional immunity to say if you go to the Nigerian Constitution, for instance, assuming there is a dispute between the individuals or between individuals and the government or between the states of the federation and the federal government, you take them to the courts here in Nigeria. So the same way, if there are commercial disputes, ordinarily the territory of Nigeria should superintend over such matters. But in that case of jurisdictional immunity, you can waive it and say, okay, let arbitration occur in Paris or in London or elsewhere as the parties may agree. Then there is the commercial immunity, which is the key point here apparently. And it says, look, this again is a standard clause that if a lender has to have certainty of you repaying and is lending to you as a sovereign entity, ordinarily, one country cannot just come and take the assets of another. Or a business enterprise in one country cannot come and take the assets of another in the of another country. But you have to have that certainty that, look, we advance this credit to you. When the time comes for repayment, you pay. Or if you don't pay, then we have a right to attach. That's the legal term. Let's say you seize your assets to repay that particular facility. For that contract to be signed, the creditor will insist on you waiving your commercial immunity. So that is the third leg. He will have the opportunity of explaining in details how all of these have come about. So, Attorney General of the Federation, thank you very much for what you have said. Do you mind?
Yes, exactly. You know, still talking about these clauses, which most Nigerians don't understand. These agreements, are there not standard procedures to be looked into before all this agreement pen is put to paper?
Yeah, you see, one, you have to appreciate that once you take a decision as a nation to go out of Nigeria and borrow, you are now bringing into effect, bringing into focus two distinct and separate international laws, into consideration. And then for you now to perhaps come to terms, there has to be certain compromises and concessions. You cannot go to China seeking to borrow and then insist that the Nigerian law will operate in China. Okay. Neither can China come into Nigeria for the purpose of executing a project and insist wholeheartedly that the Chinese law operates in Nigeria. So that is where the balancing of compromises, the balancing of concessions comes into place. The two countries will come together, see what concessions, what compromises you can make within the context of international diplomatic immunity. And you have to provide some level of comforts for each other, so as at the end of the day for you to arrive at a point to allow for the international engagement to take place without necessarily allowing your interest as a nation to be substantially affected negatively. So that is the spirit of immunity. The spirit of immunity exists for the purpose of sustenance of the diplomatic immunity of a nation, but then within the context of that international diplomatic immunity that allows for the independence of nations in terms of existence, you are equally entitled to make certain concessions when international understanding is to be brokered. No country operates on an island, and if you must not operate on an island, it is only logical, it is only natural that in the course of dealings, as far as the international understanding, international agreements, international dealings, treaties are concerned, that you should be seen to be, to allow some level of compromises, some level of concessions. So commercial immunity in its own right is in no way and is no way close to a surrender of international diplomatic immunity. It is about workability of an understanding, a commercial understanding. If you are importing technology, for example, which you do not have, it is only logical that the country bringing in or importing technological components of it into a country, you must, as a matter of right, allow for certain concessions. If you are bringing people, for example, to operate in your country, for example, as it obtains now, other countries have physical existence by way of embassies in Nigeria. And then immunity is equally accorded to persons that are in Nigeria coming from a different country of the world. That does not mean, in essence, that you are conceding or you are compromising on the international diplomatic immunity of a nation. We all know very well that the embassy of UK embassy, for example, in Nigeria, or American embassy, have their independent international immunity, diplomatic immunity, by which perhaps they are considered as a unit of America operating in Nigeria, for example. That does not in any way mean to say that Nigeria, by allowing a foreign country to have an embassy in Nigeria and then to recognize the diplomatic immunity accorded such embassies, does not in any way mean to say that Nigeria has compromised on its sovereignty. So the bottom line is to appreciate the multiple distinctions of immunity. Personalized immunity as it relates to diplomats, commercial immunity as it relates to commercial transactions, independent state diplomatic immunity as it relates to a component of state in its own right for the purpose of sustaining its independent existence as a nation. So the misconception has to do with our inability to separate and have distinct appreciation of the components of immunity within the context, within the scheme of things as it relates to international engagements.
Well, Attorney General of the Federation, thank you very much. We'll return to you so you can catch your breath in the meantime. We still have a lot more to say. I was just going to bring in the Minister of Transportation, but I will tarry a while. Let's bring in Professor Uche Waleke. Uche Waleke, crunch the numbers for us, essentially, as we're talking about commercial agreements and the security, usually, for facilities that are obtained. In normal person-to-person transaction, you'll be talking about secure credit transaction. The Honorable Attorney General of the Federation has used the word comfort. You know, comfort is also part of what is demanded as part of security for certain kinds of transactions. So, give us a sense from the financing point of view. Do you just give out money like that? Do you just give out freebies and say, "I'm giving you a loan," even if it's on the softest terms, and say, "No problem, go and spend the money. When the time comes, pay back. If you don't pay back, we'll see what we do."
Yeah, thank you, Kinsley. You see, the concerns have arisen largely against the backdrop of, you know, the experiences of countries like Madagascar, Zambia, Zimbabwe, you know, and even to some extent Kenya. And even for Madagascar in particular, where, you know, we have read that there were attempts by China to take over the ports. You know, being constructed there using Chinese loan. Even in that sense, even in that context, listening to the Honorable Minister for Justice, what has happened is only in relation to the commercial immunity and not diplomatic immunity. Okay, in all those instances, we didn't hear that China was going to take over Madagascar, for example, as a part of her colony, or China was going to treat Madagascar as Hong Kong. So Madagascar's independence is guaranteed. It is only with respect to the assets that were used as collateral, if you like, for loan. Of course, one might ask, why these loans? One can find justification for borrowing by African countries, including Nigeria. With respect to Nigeria, it is particularly because of the huge infrastructure deficit, that we have. You know about studies that have said that for us to bridge the infrastructure gap, we need a minimum of 36 trillion naira on an annual basis for the next 30 years. Where are we going to get that? It cannot come from our regular, budgetary allocation. So that is why most of the time, countries resort to borrowing. And if you look at the sources of external borrowing, in particular, there are three major types. You have the multilaterals, bilateral, and then the commercial. Okay, the multilateral is where you have, for Nigeria in particular, the bulk of our external debt has actually been multilateral, from the World Bank Group. That is the IDA and the IB, International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, as well as the African Development Bank. That constitutes about 45% of external loans. We also have the commercial, okay, largely Eurobonds. Eurobonds and then diaspora bonds, which again represent about 40% of external loans. And then the bilateral, the case China own is under bilateral. Okay, well, apart from China, Nigeria has also taken loans from Japan. That's the Japanese International Cooperation Agency. We've also taken from French Development Agency, and including India Exim Bank. So, of course, the China Exim Bank loan is the bulk of it. But if you look at the aggregate debt stock of Nigeria in dollar terms, $79 billion. Okay, what we have taken from China, if the information from DMO is any guide, represents just about 4%. 4% of the total, aggregate loan. So for me, the concern shouldn't be on the Chinese loan, but more on the commercial loans, that loans we've contracted on commercial terms. If you look at Chinese loans and other bilateral loans, what is the major attraction? The major attraction is that, they come cheap relative to other loans, okay? At 2.5%. The one we took in last year, came at 2.5% for 20 years with 7 years, moratorium. Okay, so these are the terms. So you can't compare this with the ones we are getting from Eurobonds, for example. Okay, so essentially, by and large, bilateral loans are, concessional in nature. So if you take loans from China, for example, and the ones we are getting from Eurobonds, you would see that the ones from China appear favorable. And again, they come with less conditions. Less conditions in the sense that, if it's a multilateral loans will expect that the loans should comply with Paris Club requirements or conditions, which sometimes say you must implement economic reforms and all that. So Chinese loans won't give you those conditions. Won't talk about maybe governance, human rights, and all that. Okay, so they're easier to contract one, and as I said, they are also cheaper. And don't forget too that most of these Chinese loans don't come as cash. They come by way of projects. So they are project tied, which are the types of loans we require in this country. Project tied loans. If you take a loan and you tie it to project, and the person is saying he's not going to give you cash, that the loan will come by way of project. And of course, as security, he says once you default, if you default, part of the project that is being executed will be taken over by them. Okay, so for me, it is a lot better. It's a lot better than giving you a loan, and of course you must provide collateral. There's no loan that doesn't come with collateral. It's not a grant. So what I'm saying in essence is that, you know, you asked the question, what is the storm in a teacup? I think, for me, and I'm happy the honorable ministers are here, you know, shedding more light on it. For me, it's because of the lack of understanding. That's why we're having this mountain out of making a mountain out of a molehill, you know, in my view. But that's not to say that the burden of debt on Nigeria isn't rising. It is rising, especially when you look at the debt service to revenue ratio. We have a revenue problem, really. But the moment we are able to, you know, boost our revenue, then that burden will drop. In terms of debt to GDP ratio, that may not be a problem. But debt service to revenue, you know, remains a problem. And it's a problem because the bulk of our debt, 65% of our debt stock is domestic. The bulk of our debt is domestic, and domestic debts, you know, are more expensive than external debt. So we should work on the revenue side to be able to make our debt stock sustainable.
Okay, thank you. I'll still stay with you. You know, you talked about loans being necessary for infrastructural development.
Certainly.
But don't you think that it is also important for these agreements to go through the relevant processes and vetting and check so that it's all in the best interest of the country, so that these clauses like this will not just pop up, you know, after some years?
I think they do, and the Honorable Minister for Transport also alluded to it. From my experience as Commissioner for Finance in my state, okay, before you can take any loan, first the offer letter from the bank, if we are taking from the bank, the offer letter is taken to the Attorney General's office, you know, to scrutinize. Okay, my duty as Commissioner of Finance and then my team will look at the terms, the interest rate, make sure it's competitive. Okay, we'll make sure we can get the best deal, and then we'll send it to the Attorney General's office to vet. Okay, so that Attorney General will you know, give his opinion and then return to me. If he disagrees with the terms, I will bring the attention of the bank, you know, draw the attention of the bank to it for possible amendment. If it's amended, then on the strength of that, the Commissioner for Finance will prepare. I will do a memo. I will do a memo to the State Executive Council. Okay, it gets to the State Executive Council and is debated. Okay, if it gets approved there, it doesn't end there. The Secretariat, ESCO Secretariat, will also attach the extract of the ESCO and send to the State Assembly. I'm talking from my own experience, you know. So the State Assembly too will go through it. So it goes through these processes. After the State Assembly has gone through it, it comes back to the executive. Okay, the governor will also call his team, and they will still look at it to be sure that what the State Assembly approved is what you know, we sent. It's only after that the signing can be done. And so I also think at the federal level, these processes, you know, must have you know, taken place. So if they have gone through these processes, for me, it wouldn't make sense for us to begin now to talk about repudiation. Let's cancel, let's repudiate. No, it wouldn't make sense, because it will be more counterproductive and then put Nigeria in bad light. So what we can do, in my opinion, taking advantage of COVID-19, is to talk about you know, renegotiation. If we feel that there are terms in those loan agreements that are not favorable, you know, to Nigeria, we can renegotiate the terms, particularly with respect to having local content. Again, from experience, you know, when I was in government, local content is important, because there is this allegation that, of course, when Chinese, you know, when they give you loan, China Exim Bank gives you loan, it is the bank that will assign contractors, of course, naturally, you know, for them to do the work. So in that case, part of what we should be talking about, you know, should be to ensure too that some Nigerians are involved local content in whatever work that they do. So I think the processes are usually followed, and in the case we are talking about, I'm pretty sure the National Assembly, you know, also looked at it.
All right, thank you very much, Professor Ochewaleke. Incidentally, the Honorable Minister of Transportation himself was Speaker, two-time Speaker of Rivers State House of Assembly, so he will have the benefit of the experience. I recall we had you on Good Morning Nigeria sometime in the past, and you said that as governor, one of the things you ought to have done would have been to access facilities by way of loans to speed up the development of your state. You'll give us the benefit of your experience, all of that. But tell us, there was a remark you made as to why you were invited by the House of Reps. That's one leg. And against the background of the explanation by the learned Attorney General of the Federation, one is at a loss. I wasn't at the hearings, except for the reports that I read, as to why that hearing took place in the first instance, whether there was no understanding of the basic issues and concepts involved in all of this.
That's the right question to ask. And just like you asked, the person who is having the AIT also asked that question. Loans are approved by the National Assembly. It is unconstitutional for anybody to take a loan without the approval of the National Assembly. So why are we being invited when already you have approved it? Now, you can say to us, send us a copy of what you signed, which we approved. Because it's almost an embarrassment for the National Assembly to say, we're not aware. For what you approved, but let National Assembly not be the focus, because it will be distracted. What the focus is Article 8, subsection 1, which I can read here, which says that the borrower hereby irrevocably waives any immunity on the grounds of sovereign. Yes. Sovereign is nation.
It's nation.
Nation. And otherwise, for itself, why I'm even reading this, because I'm reacting to the editorial by a newspaper, an important newspaper in Nigeria, which says that we are signing away the sovereignty of the country. And that's because newspapers educate us. That's what you read for information. Now, so I'm reading what they quoted. It says, on the grounds of sovereign or otherwise for itself or its property, in connection with any arbitration proceeding. They didn't say tomorrow one Tim Swan will be president of Nigeria. Just like somebody made a joke and said the new governor of Katsina State is Tim Swan. No, for Christ's sake. To be invited to come and discuss this is a bit embarrassing, because it question my own education. Now, it proceeds, he said, in connection with any arbitration proceeding pursuant to Article 8.5, Article 8, subsection 5, thereof, with the enforcement of any arbitral award, which means when the two of us go to arbitration, if you win me, whatever the arbitration says you should pay, that's what we are going to go for. You can't come and say, no, you can't come into my country, I have immunity. So what's the quarrel about? Are they saying that Chinese are the same father with us, so they just look at us, hey, gentlemen of Nigeria, you're very handsome, take $2 billion. No way. The reason why President Buhari was elected is to develop Nigeria. And he comes and says, look, I don't have money. One of the easiest ways to develop a country is to borrow and pay back. And not only is he paying back the loan that this $500 million was gotten under President Goodluck, as I was saying, and we are paying back in our own government because there's a continuum. Mind you, I didn't say that it was wrong for President Goodluck to have taken the loan to construct the rail to Kaduna. What I'm saying is that both the newspaper and the gentleman who spoke, I don't know who he is, see, he was speaking up, and very carefully with words. Fraud? How? So if there was fraud, that fraud must have been perpetrated in Goodluck Jonathan's government, because that loan was taken in Goodluck Jonathan's government. If we signed the sovereignty of the country, that sovereignty of the country was signed in Goodluck Jonathan's government, which was a PDP government. Don't forget that President Buhari commissioned that project in our first year in office. So we could not have constructed rail from 186 kilometers from Kaduna to Abuja in less than 1 year. No, it's not a joke. So such recklessness at that age is embarrassing. Now, for the government, I think we praise Goodluck. If you read the president's speech on the day he was commissioning, we confirmed that 80% of that project was done by President Goodluck Jonathan, which was the reason for which they named Abo Station after him for that achievement. We then took a step further to say we cannot progress in Nigeria in economic development without transportation. Just imagine tomato in Lagos, when indeed tomatoes are wasting in Kano and in the north. Yeah. All you need to do, why the tomatoes are not found in Lagos, is because there is no transportation. It will take you 14 days to transport cargo from Lagos to Abuja. For us to bring these rails, these coaches, 14 to 20 days. But if the rails were working, in 8 hours you're in Lagos. Yeah. Because at 120 kilometers or 150 kilometers per hour for 800 kilometers. Just tell me how many hours it takes you to get to Lagos. So the president now says, look, we are going to change what we are doing. It's no longer roads alone. We'll combine both roads and rail. So we must, because we didn't meet enough money. They shouldn't forget that we didn't just see money. If we saw that money that Obasanjo saw in his time, maybe things would have changed in terms of rail construction. So the man says, let's deal with this 1,300 to 1,500 kilometers of rail from Lagos to Kano, because you have 30 million tons of cargo on that track. If we deal with that, we would have been able to ease off this road. So where are we? I say, sir, on my table is an application for loan by the same government to Chinese government, China Exim Bank. If you permit us, we can pursue the loan through Ministry of Finance. So Ministry of Finance now engages China Exim Bank to say there's a loan that was already in a request by the previous government. We are interested to further it. And the government says, look, to give people this huge amount of money, $8.7 billion won't be easy. So we can give you the first set of 1.6 to construct Lagos to Ibadan. In fact, they were to give us Lagos to Ibadan and Kano to Kaduna at the same time. But they gave us Lagos to Ibadan first, and now they are proceeding to give us Kano to Kaduna, Kaduna to Abuja, then Abuja to Lagos. Are they telling us not to take the loan? Then, you know why I specifically said, please be careful to the National Assembly. Please be careful of what this probe on the loan agreement. It's because we just recently were trying to make an application for the Port Harcourt Maiduguri rail. If nothing else is happening, you know that our brothers are saying, oh, we don't want to do the southeast. We don't want to do anything in the southeast. We want to do anything in the north. Now that we are applying to say, give us some loans so that we can construct the Lagos to Maiduguri, Port Harcourt to Maiduguri. By the way, a month or two ago, the National Assembly had warned the Minister of Finance not to come back here for a borrowing plan without including the Port Harcourt to Maiduguri. So the ministry is doing everything. The president has given approval. We're about to go to cabinet for approval, and then you're shouting, "Oh, these terms are bad. These Chinese people are wicked people." How would they give you the money?
You actually said that they might not give the money.
Exactly.
The National Assembly.
Exactly, and I have documents to that effect where people are we're getting signals that they become a bit apprehensive about. Are we doing it because we don't want to pay them back? So if we're a lender, will we continue to lend when the borrower is saying, no, these terms are bad?
Well, it turns out that as we're having this conversation this morning, there's no member of the House of Reps to respond to this. But it's a pertinent question to raise as to the capacity for understanding these concepts and the larger issues that have been raised. I don't know. I mean, let me put the issue on the table. Why? I mean, it seemed as if there was no clarification, or nobody in the committee itself to say, look, maybe they just speak to that you are waiving sovereignty without breaking it down, and so on and so forth. Let's bring in again the Attorney General of the Federation. Attorney General, you listen to Professor Uche Waleke give the experience at the state level when the state, of course, is seeking a facility domestically. Of course, to get into external borrowing, they will have to go through the approval process of the DMO. Now, for loans and facilities being obtained by the federal government, what is the procedure?
Well, the conventional procedure, if not perhaps limited breaches that set into the system on account of certain procedural immunities relating to previous administration. A case in point is the case of fee and ID. And that eventually resulted in prosecution arising from the procedural breaches associated with the contractual agreement giving rise to fee and ID case. But the conventional practice, one, is to ensure at the end of the day that any agreement that is conceived is passed through the office of the Attorney General of the Federation for vetting. But I think the point of interest relating thereto is the fact that before even a draft copy of the agreement is processed, there is a procedural precedent that all associated approvals, permits associated with a loan facility are complied with. If you are talking of the National Assembly, there has to be an approval of the National Assembly for the loan facility to be acquired. And then at the end of the day, when eventually that approval is secured from the National Assembly, the other bureaucratic processes of putting off a draft agreement with the parties participating is now carried out. And then the draft agreement as processed is passed on to the Office of the Attorney General for the purpose of vetting SEM to ensure that the national interest element is effectively factored and accommodated in the draft agreement. When eventually the agreement is vetted, it is now processed back to the affected ministry, which now has a further responsibility to present SEM before Federal Executive Council for consideration and deliberation by the council members, where opinions are entertained, and then eventually, if the council finds the content, spirit, and terms of the agreement acceptable, the council now approves the agreement, and then the relevant ministries, departments, and agencies are given the go-ahead to facilitate SEM. So what I'm saying in essence, it is a multi-sectoral, multi-organs arrangement that allows cross-fertilization of not only ideas, but cross-fertilization of consensus building and agreement, all targeted at ensuring at the end of the day that the interest of the nation is adequately protected. If for any reason whatsoever, at the end of the day, there are certain breaches that set into the process, perhaps maybe overlooking the relevance of the Office of the Attorney General, for example, in providing the desired technical support to the input in the agreement, it usually translates to criminal prosecution, as what obtains relating to the fee and ID, where the procedure was apparently shortchanged, taking into consideration that necessary permits that constitute the foundation for engagement into such agreement were overlooked, necessary vetting by the Office of the Attorney General was overlooked, necessary approval of the Federal Executive Council was equally overlooked, and it eventually translated to a criminal prosecution of the parties involved. So the procedure is indeed a multi-sectoral, multi-organs of government, in the sense that the National Assembly has a role to play in giving an approval for the loan. The executive has a role to play in ensuring that the vetting is done by the Office of the Attorney General. The Federal Executive Council is carried along for the purpose of deliberating on the agreement and indeed approving SEM where it finds it reasonable and acceptable to have it approved.
Okay, Honorable Minister, you know, Mr. Professor Uche Owaleke spoke about collaterals and, you know, renegotiating terms of agreement. Will that be possible?
You see, we have passed the stage of renegotiating or reconsidering, because whatever you have to do as a nation in terms of international engagement, you ought to have done SEM at the point of allowing for these processes, at the point of the National Assembly looking into the request for loan and approving SEM, at the point of the Office of the Attorney General betting the agreement and ensuring that the national interest is factored, at the point of the Federal Executive Council giving an approval to the draft MOU, and indeed at the point of international negotiations to ensure at the end of the day that the interest, the Nigerian interest as factored into the agreement, is indeed negotiated at the international level before parties eventually signs the agreement. So you cannot be approbating and at the same time reprobating, conducting the necessary procedures associated with your country, the other country processing same in line with the necessary procedures, and in exceptional circumstances you are even expected to ratify SEM by an instrument of ratification duly signed by the respective countries, and then after ratifying SEM in line with the international best practices, and then you are now coming back to say, no, we are mistaken, we are wrong, we ought not to have given approval for the facility to be obtained or acquired, and so we want to renegotiate. Renegotiate what? So the option that is apparently visible and logical, that will save your face as a nation, having undergone the processes up to the point of ratification, is perhaps to revoke and rescind the contract. Even at that, revocation and rescission of SEM will certainly attract liability, because the breach factor must naturally set in, and the other country that has been subjected to these associated rigors will naturally be exposed to certain liabilities, and that will entitle them as a matter of right to claim for damages. The clause that has been read by Honorable Minister of Transportation is a deliberate attempt to accord protection. So the idea of arbitration in the event of breach has set into that clause. The idea of attachment, or perhaps concession on the attachment of commercial asset of a nation, has been factored into it. So at the end of the day, if by any stretch of imagination, as a nation at this point and hour, we decide to revoke or rescind the contract, that will now kickstart the relevant clause of the agreement by way of arbitration, and then Nigeria cannot claim diplomatic immunity and refuse to submit to international arbitration when the clause is eventually factored, and then the element of liability by way of subjecting China to unnecessary trouble, to unnecessary expenditure associated with facilitation and processing of the loan agreement will equally factor in, and then Nigeria will be exposed to a liability when in fact no value has been added and obtained arising from the conduct of perhaps the National Assembly that insists on revocation or rescission at this hour. It is indeed not about surrender of immunity, but indeed about providing guarantee and comfort for a commercial loan facility.
So no retreat, no surrender.
No retreat, no surrender.
Forgive me, let me continue to read the end of the clause so I can see. No, the same clause they're talking about.
Yeah.
The clause says, while a borrower would have to borrow on lender's terms to ensure repayment, it must be within the confines of international best practices. What else are you looking for? The people say, we will not do anything that is outside what other parts of the world, other countries do.
I don't know. You're probably not the best person to ask this
No,
question. I know Professor Waleke wants to say something. I just want to... What was the motivation for this whole investigation? What was the trigger, so that we can have...
That's why you need to bring in the National Assembly, because believe me, I respect the National Assembly.
They were invited actually, but for one reason or another they couldn't come. Both the Senate Committee and the House of Reps.
Okay, so that's because actually I sat in my office
beyond their control,
and I got a letter saying, Minister of Transport, appear before the Committee on Treaties and come and discuss loan agreement. It would be wrong for me to say, dear Honorable House, I can't appear because I don't have anything to do with loan. No. I have to respect the National Assembly, and I appeared before them. And I was surprised, believe me. That's why I won. It's unnecessary. Because what you'll be doing is you're exposing the National Assembly before the country to say that they were not aware of this clause when they actually approved the loan. Why approve a loan that you're not aware of?
All right, Professor Waleke, you wanted to say something?
Yes, first let me start by reiterating what I said earlier, that relative to other loans you've taken, Chinese loans are largely concessional. Whether you're looking at the interest rate or you're looking at even the tenor, they are concessional. I just wanted to react to the issue of renegotiation. When I talked about renegotiation, I was actually referring to taking advantage of the COVID-19 era. Okay, of course I had said it before that we can't afford to say we are repudiating the debt or we are revoking. Okay, but we can, because I'm aware that China has is an agreement with major creditor countries, okay, to offer debt relief to debtor countries. because of COVID-19, whether we shouldn't explore that option. But by and large, if you look at section 21 of the Debt Management Office Act 2003, that talks about National Assembly must approve any external loan we are taking. You also marry that with section 41 of the Fiscal Responsibility Act of 2007 that says such loans must be exclusive for capital projects or human development. If you look at those clauses in those two acts, the Chinese loans meet those conditions. So all I'm saying is that we can take advantage of COVID-19 to renegotiate. And talking about the National Assembly, one may not be surprised because what we have now is the 9th Assembly. The people that the group that must have approved the loans, taking resolutions on the loans, were previous assembly. So these ones are new, and that's the more reason they will need more information with respect to these loans. And that's why I've always advocated, between the DMO, the Federal Ministry of Finance, Budget and National Planning, and the Office of the Auditor General of the Federation, there should be a regular report to the National Assembly, through the Public Accounts Committee, on the status of our loans, because it's already assuming, very, large proportion.
All right, Professor Waleke, thank you very much. You're watching Good Morning Nigeria, reaching you live on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority. We're taking a short break now. When we return from the break, we take viewers' reactions and then continue with the conversation with our guests.
Okay.
All right, we have to skip that break now. In the meantime, we have some technical glitches there. So let's just take the twist. Do you mind straight away? Onwongogo Silvano says, we sing the song of borrowing with pleasure as if it's a blessed norm. Can the government defend what they achieved with the previous borrowings, showing physical and material evidence as proof of prudent economic management? Don't forget, borrowing enslaves. Well, Onwongogo, if you've been listening to this conversation, the Honorable Minister of Transportation has given you an example. Yes. So the loan that was obtained for the construction of the Abuja-Kaduna rail line did about 80% of the job, and the incumbent administration deployed 20% from the regular budgetary cycle to finish up the job. So you're looking for further evidence?
Well, let's move on now. Chris Simon tweets, it's not about borrowing, but it's the judicious use of the money that matters. All these years, Nigeria has been borrowing and we're still having decayed infrastructure and infrastructure's deficit. Then why borrowing every year?
This is from Dele Jack Solomon. Signing loan agreements with a clause that waives the sovereign immunity of the country if it defaults in its repayment plan has negative implications on the sovereignty and economic development of Nigeria. It's high time we learned to judiciously use what we have to get what we need. Well, again, Dele Jack Solomon, one of our regulars, I hope you listen to the detailed explanation provided by the Attorney General of the Federation with regard to the distinction, he said, between the sovereign immunity of a country, and that's the territorial immunity, jurisdictional immunity, as well as commercial immunity. This relates to a commercial transaction, and it doesn't affect our sovereignty as an entity.
Yes, and Titus Monday Knock tweets, should we continue to borrow so that our future generations would be the ones to pay? A debtor is always a slave to the creditor until the day he remits his debts. In our case, most of the people collecting these debts would have been out of power. Let's make do with what we have.
This is coming from Mike Ayakwa. Says loans are essential ingredients in refloating economies. Interest are cost of loans, payable, and the reward for parting with liquidity. Nigeria is not the only country that borrows. Even developed countries do. But when doing so, the terms must not be ambiguous. There must be a moratorium and a total package of the facility. Interest rates also should be flexible so that they can be renegotiated depending on the realities on the ground.
And Omobola Babs tweets, Nigeria and theatrics. How is it possible that Nigeria will sign an agreement that will cede her sovereignty to another country here? China beats my imagination. Whoever conceives such noxious narrative doesn't mean well for us. Everything isn't politics. Our sovereignty is intact. Getting a loan for development is not an issue. Even advanced economies do it for critical infrastructural development. What is important is that such loans are expended on purposes for which they are borrowed. And exactly the Minister of Transport said 80% has gone and 20% is coming in.
Festus Akimboyewa says politicians should stop confusing us about the sovereignty clause in our borrowing agreements, now which is a standard requirement. The sovereignty clause in these agreements does not mean that a creditor country can occupy Nigeria if we go into default. It just means that we cannot decide not to pay our creditors simply because we are a sovereign entity.
And Law Alpha C tweets, I was opposed to stupendous and homogeneous borrowing by the federal government until I saw the need to tackle infrastructure. But the terms for repayment have to be well defined in order to protect the interests of the nation state, even after this government.
Now, Yunusa Idris, no distractions. Government should go ahead and borrow more. We are witnessing infrastructural development in transportation and the road sector. But I'm calling for the involvement of quantity surveyors in estimating and billing of heavy engineering projects such as railways, roads, and harbors.
And pharmacist Umar tweets, the borrowing is very okay as far as we continue to see development projects carried out by the current government. However, there must be high level of sincerity, integrity, honesty, dedication, and sacrifice to achieve the intended goals. Kudos to President Buhari.
Ayola Adeni tweets, borrowing is good for infrastructure, but utilization of such facilities is equally important. Some previous loans were not properly utilized.
Mutana Farouk tweets, there are always terms and conditions when it comes to lending and borrowing. It is meritorious to borrow to fix the capital projects, but it is disastrous to borrow to service individuals by buying cars, renovations, jumbo salaries and allowances. Corruption retards development.
Nandom Buyek, Honorable Minister, with all the natural resources we are blessed with, I think a bigger brother like Nigeria should be the one lending to other nations. Is it impossible? Let us not remain like the one who is standing by the river, yet crying and dying of thirst.
That's why our gentlemen here in the studio will have time to respond to the tweets, but we take a break now. When we return, the conversation continues.
All right, you're watching Good Morning Nigeria, still on the network service of the NTA. Professor Uche Waleke, that's a point that we need to also clarify. I mean, we talked about all the issues relating to borrowing, why we need to borrow. But we do know that if you borrow and there is a repayment clause, you must repay. Now, there have been instances, even in the recent years, where countries, sovereign entities have defaulted in the repayment of their facilities. Iceland was one about a decade or so ago, and until recently, Greece was also in that bind. So what happens when a sovereign entity defaults in the repayment of its many facilities?
Yes, that speaks to the terms and conditions, of the loan. A good example is the one we are discussing, that in the event of default, the assets that are being constructed, the projects that are being constructed with the loan, will be taken over. So that is one consequence. But for me again, the good thing about Chinese loans, unlike other loans, is that they also have room to accommodate other means of repayment. Okay, for China, you must not repay with cash. Based on what I've read, there are countries that are using their resources to repay, although that also has its limitations. Angola, for example, China has the greatest exposure in Africa, to Angola. Angola has taken over $40-something billion from China. Okay, in our own case, we are talking about just $3.1 billion. For Angola, it's over $40-something billion, and it got to a point Angola started repaying with the oil. So it became a case of a loan for oil agreement. So I think we are not yet at risk of default with respect to Chinese loans. Again, given the size And the terms, I've said the ones you can find on the DMO website for 20 years, 7 years moratorium. I don't think Nigeria is still at risk with respect to that. So, but I also think that going forward, okay, we may also need to explore those other options, particularly given the huge amount we budget every year for debt service. In 2020 budget, for example, we are allocating 2.9 trillion for debt service. And of course, you know, the bulk of that is not for external. The bulk of debt service in Nigeria today is to service domestic debt, which constitutes about 65%, you know, of our debt. So with respect to external debt, I think the country is not yet you know, at risk. That's my take for that.
I was just wondering, Juma, I mean, interestingly, two of the cabinet members are here with us as our guests. Shouldn't, once you already have the agreement, and the agreement is it's already been implemented, shouldn't the greater challenge then be to say, look, how do we adhere to the terms of the facility? What are the likely obstacles that could frustrate the implementation of the rail project? Therefore, if, assuming we want to do oversight, we say, look, that is our chief concern, to say, look, let us be sure that this project is executed and that it's able to repay itself within a 20-year limit guaranteed for this, rather than seeking to say, okay, what is this term saying now? This thing is sovereign, the other one is waiving, and so on and so forth. Isn't that a challenge that that ordinarily should engage us? To say, once you have signed an agreement, you are bound by it, and that you have an obligation to perform.
Well, I think the essence of oversight function vested in the National Assembly is to ensure compliance. A loan has been approved, facility obtained, is meant for a particular project. The project is executed and repayment plans are in place. So the oversight function is to ensure compliances with identified milestones as far as, one, the application of the loan is concerned, and two, the repayment options are concerned. The idea of a kind of turning the wheel back by way of revocation, rescission is out of it, because the necessary approvals, necessary concessions were already looked into, analyzed, and eventually given by the National Assembly. So the National Assembly should not be seen as appropriating, giving an approval for the facility, and then reprobating by way of insisting that we should revoke what has been approved. But the bottom line, if we are to do justice to the constitutional role expected of a National Assembly, is to look at the components relating to the processes, the procedure, and in case of loan facilities, repayment of same, as to whether justice is done to these processes in compliance, and not necessarily to undermine the process halfway, even where it was ab initio approved by the National Assembly.
Honorable Minister, what has been your experience in terms of getting the support by way of oversight to say, look, we're actually crunching the numbers? Attorney General makes a valid point that the oversight should relate to milestones. You have a 20-year window to repay this facility on account of this project. Where are you now? What is likely to impede you? How do we leapfrog whatever impediments they are likely to be, rather than just, you know, the typical show of see the TV cameras and everybody goes back home?
Okay, first is, look, there are two types of oversight I will address on this. When it comes to the loan and the repayment of the loan, I'm not in a position to discuss that, because that happens with Ministry of Finance. But to assist Ministry of Finance, what we've done, what we did was to go to Cabinet to get approval for the Nigerian Railway Corporation to open an account, an escrow account, so that whatever is in excess of running costs that we have, we pay into that account that could assist in repayment. But don't forget, so far, it's Kaduna, so not much in terms of cargo. But in terms of passengers, we run at 90 million 90, but certainly not up to 100 million in a month. And then we now get 120 as income. So that excess of 30 million is what we want to put in an escrow account that will assist Ministry of Finance to begin to repay back as our own contribution. That's as it pertains to the issue of repayment. But I just told you here that what came out of that committee sitting was that DMO confirmed that they have been able to pay back $930 million out of the $500 million. Indeed, let me tell you what the cabinet did, that the president did. The former Minister for Finance, we went to cabinet to say, look, we want a loan of $500 million, and the Chinese have agreed to give us a loan of $500 million to buy rolling stocks, which is coaches, locomotives, and all that. And she said, no, Nigeria can afford $500 million. So I don't support the borrowing of $500 million to buy rolling stock. And the president agreed. And today we are paying for the rolling stock from budgetary provision. And we have got more than 60–70% of the money. Probably, if President Buhari was the president at that time, probably he would not have borrowed the $500 million, because probably he would have relied on budgetary provision. The reason why we are borrowing for Lagos Ibadan is that is $1.6 billion. That's quite a huge amount of money. So what, therefore, our contribution is just to ensure that as we are running, whatever is in the excess of the running cost is paid back to Ministry of Finance to assist them in repayment. That's at it. When it comes to construction, I have good relationship with the committee on land transport that supervises or performs oversight function as far as railway is concerned. And there's no time we've gone with them to the site that they have not confirmed that not only are we meeting timelines, they are impressed with the activities. There are two ways we have approached it. We must also give credit to President Goodluck Jonathan's government, because they brought in an Italian firm, team, which is European, to supervise a Chinese company which constructs. The implication, therefore, is that you must meet the European standards. So you don't see our railways not run. And I'll give you an example in terms of communication. When we looked at the communication and signaling, the equipment they supplied they're not below standard. What they were lower standard than what we should ordinarily be asking for. So when we came, we talked with the European company, and we talked with the Chinese company and said, okay, you up the standard to that level of the European. That's where we are. So we now have an upgraded standard for communication and signaling, which enables us to even use one track instead of double track. Because once you have good communication and good signaling, all you do is when a rail is coming and you are in Kaduna, you say, oh, wait, when I pass, you can continue. And that's what happens instead of double track. So basically, National Assembly oversights us, and they've been doing a good job, because when they are coming, everybody, you see the MD is rushing to do that, the minister is rushing to go and meet them wherever. There's no big man in it, because they have to approve your budget. They have to approve your budget, and they really have to know how you're using the money that they have approved. That they have done well, and I think that relationship is good.
You'll be going back to the National Assembly on the 18th to address them and give them details on how you've been managing the transport sector. What do you think this discussion or conversation will center on?
No, I wouldn't know. Because I wouldn't know is that it certainly cannot be on the loan, because I don't take a loan. Well, as far as the Ministry of Transport is concerned, if it is loan, then they need to address Ministry of Finance. Okay. But what the chairman did say that day when I said, well, I'm not here to answer any question on loan because I don't take loan, was that okay? And I said, what I do is that I implement the loan. And what I have done is to implement what I have been given. Okay. We have completed Kaduna, Abuja, and everybody will say how much contribution it has made to the growth of the Kaduna economy and the Abuja economy. The number of jobs it has created. In fact, the cost of land now, the land you would have bought at 150 around that area is going for 1 million naira. Yes. That is economic growth. I'm not an economist, so I'm sure I'm just talking as a layman. Then go to Lagos Ibadan. They've sold all the land on that distance. We have put 2 infrastructure there. We have put and that's why when people attack the Chinese, I just really know that they are being fair to these guys. We're talking with the Chinese without putting $1. They are constructing a factory at Kajola to produce locally locomotives, coaches, and wagons. What else are you asking for? The same way they have agreed that once they start constructing Port Harcourt to Maiduguri, they are going to build a seaport at Bonny, and they will build a new industrial in Port Harcourt. What else
all
are we
by
looking
the side, not part of the agreement.
Well, there are different agreements for the main agreement of the contract. Okay. Yeah. But there are agreements.
Honorable Minister, thank you very much. Attorney General of the Federation, I would like this to form part of your closing thoughts. Ordinarily, it's a fairly straightforward question. What is the language of an agreement to be signed by two parties in the event that the two entities are of different nationalities and therefore different languages?
The language of an agreement with international collaboration is building consensus. And there is no standard language that is of universal application. But it is about how hard you negotiate as a nation for the purpose of affording protection to your sovereignty and to your commercial interest. If, for example, country A may concede to handing over the facility put in place arising from the loan, country B may not necessarily wholeheartedly agree to that arrangement. It's indeed a function of negotiations, a function of concessions, a function of compromises, all geared towards getting the maximum benefit, maximum understanding, and maximum concessions that will be beneficial to our interest as a nation. But then the bottom line is it is about compromises, it is about building consensus, and it is about building understanding that is mutually beneficial to the parties of interest.
Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for your input and insight into the topic. Thank you so much for coming on Good Morning Nigeria. Minister of Justice and Attorney General of the Federation, Abubakar Malami-san, it's been a pleasure having you as always. And Minister of Transportation, Right Honorable Rotimi Amechi, thank you so much for coming on Good Morning Nigeria. Professor Uche Waleke, Chairman, Chartered Institute of Bankers of Nigeria and former Commissioner of Finance, Imo State, thank you so much for your input. And that's Good Morning Nigeria for today. Thank you so much for watching. I am Jumwa Yusuf.
And I'm Kingsley Osadolo, asking you to take responsibility, stay safe and be well. See you tomorrow, same time, 7 o'clock in the morning.